you and I have been, not to say spoiling to have a conversation about immigration policy, but we've certainly been talking about having a conversation about U.S. immigration policy. Now seems like a pretty good time. So let me just start with this. I mean, we're all immigrants. All of us have come here to the United States. My family's, my mom and dad's side, or the respective sides of my families have been here for, a long time, relative, to a lot of people in the United States. But, there are a lot of people like you who have been here not so long. I mean, in terms of, the immigration, process. And, I don't know. I think your perspective on this, I always find it fascinating because it's real world for you, right?
Yeah. But, as an economist, I just, I try to take myself out of this picture and just focus on the empirical evidence. And I haven't seen serious research that highlights, major costs, to the, flow of immigrants, and especially into an advanced economy. Immigrants actually come in and provide, first of all, make the overall workforce more productive, which is really interesting. Interesting. Enhancing the productivity of native workers, stimulating entrepreneurship, starting businesses, hiring natives. It's amazing, what you see generating what we call positive spillovers. It's amazing what you see, when you open up your economy to highly productive individuals. And by the way, highly productive individuals doesn't mean necessarily, PhD economists, right? I always joke around that, look, it's always nice to have somebody come and mow the lawn when you are unfortunately or fortunately working on something else and you can't take a break to go and cut your own grass, right? You're trying to cure disease. You're trying to solve, some complicated problem and you are stuck at your desk and the grass in the backyard is growing and growing and growing. And then this wonderful individual that, comes in and it's their job with their landscaping company to mow the lawn and make your house look beautiful and plant some beautiful trees. And they earn a living doing it. And some of them become multimillionaires doing it and providing an amazing service to so many people. So I see both, immigration for, people with college degrees and people without college degrees, as beneficial. Not just because it's my opinion, but because there are decades and decades of research, that back that.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. I don't think there's a whole lot of argument around that. Like the idea that we're putting up, border walls to keep everybody out. And that's simply nonsense. We have border walls. There are border walls around countries all over the world, right? And there are borders for countries all over the world. There is economic opportunity that's made available in the United States. That's like nothing else in the world. And so, the idea of being able to manage that in some meaningful way, I think I think it's relevant to the sustainability and the integrity of every nation on the planet. Everybody should have, an immigration policy.
Yeah,
but hang on. I got one point. I have one point to make there.
Sure.
I think that our immigration policy is too much of a black box, too much of a trip to see the wizard, that it's not clear on, how long it's going to take for me to get in. It's it's absolutely confusing and stressful for the people that are trying to immigrate to the United States. And that part of it needs to be repaired. I mean, it has been unaddressed for a long time. The news this week, which I wanted to talk a little bit about that because there's a news hook here. The idea of getting rid of the EB-5 program, which was a foreign investment program, which is really kind of a weird thing. I had it pitched to me years ago by a guy that I kind of know that lives nearby. He had utilized it to basically to build up reserves to open up. I believe it was residential health facilities for seniors was sort of the way that he was doing this, and that it was a financial mechanism for him. It was weird. I mean, and I looked into it. I just didn't see how that would work. The idea of a $5 billion payment to come in and to make further investment in the United States with, a pathway to citizenship attached to it, which is what President Trump is doing. It's very similar to a program that's existed in Canada for decades. I find it somewhat interesting, but I wanted to talk to you about the limitations of things such as this, and then the different lines that we could have in terms of admission to citizenship in the United States.
Look, I can't really speak to any particular policies or policy agendas, but I can definitely talk about the economics. And the economics are pretty simple. If you raise the cost of something, right, then what do you expect to happen? You expect a less consumption of whatever it is that you're raising the cost of. And so if you increase the barrier to entry for one group, you're going to get less entrance from that group. And so, you got to be careful, because if you count on that for revenue, you may not get as much revenue as you would have hoped to get. At the same time, lowering the cost for one group it raises the incentive to come in the other group, right? It actually could potentially cause the other group, because an increase in the number of people coming through a different mechanism. And so I think when you talk about these complicated things, you have to take a full approach. You have to look at every pathway and try to address, right, looking at the incentives that the policy or policy changes are going to create before settling for one approach over another. So again, really important to put on a policy hat and really try to figure out what incentives you're creating before going ahead and implementing one particular policy. So the reason I say that is because there's really good research. When I was in grad school, I did some research on this, and there's really good research that says that when you raise the bar to entry, you end up with fewer, you end up essentially, if you raise the bar for legal migration, you end up with more illegality. You end up with people coming in illegally because the cost is too high to come in legal. And then you also, and then it goes on. And then once they come in, because they've come in and it was so difficult to come in. In other words, they paid a high cost. There was a high barrier to entry. They end up staying longer. They don't want to leave because they know that if they leave, they'll have to pay another really crazy cost to come in. They won't be able to come back in. And so you end up with, when the barrier to entry is really high, you end up with fewer legal flows, and you end up with people staying forever, right? And staying longer. And so the point is that the policy that was intended to keep people out ends up causing a higher stock of illegal workers in the United States, and I'm just sharing that because again, I don't take any stance on any policies, from the administration or any other administration, right? My job is not to talk about policy. My job is to talk about economics, and ultimately the economics imply that when you make policy, you have to be very careful about the economic incentives that you're creating, because the outcome might not be the intended one. So you have to be very careful. And that's how I'm going to leave this here. Because otherwise we could talk about this for days. I have so much research on the topic, that we could talk about. We could have
We'll pick it up in the future. And I mean, so that was I think it was a good initial conversation. All right. So let's call it good there, Orphe.